Welcome to the Stocks on the Rock Show. Whether you like it neat, on the rocks, chilled, or warm, everybody's happier when there's money in their account and a drink in their glass. Let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to today's edition of Stocks on the Rocks. You know how we had some big news this week came out of Apple, so I figured we would analyze Apple stock, and since we're doing all things Apple, let's talk Applejack. If you guys are new to the channel, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, smash that notification bell so you get the alerts and the updates every time that we put a new show. Stocks on the Rocks, if you're new, what we do each week is we analyze a spirit and we analyze a stock. If you've got a specific stock that you'd like to see, do me a favor, put that in the comment section down below of something you might want to see, or a specific spirit maybe you want us to review, do that. So let's go ahead and get rolling. So I'm going to start by talking about Applejack, and Applejack is actually a brandy, but funny enough is that this is from the oldest distillery in America, which I thought was pretty interesting. In 1698, Alexander Laird immigrated from, oddly enough, I know this is hard to believe, Scotland, to Monmouth County, New Jersey, and he didn't see that there was any rye or there was any wheat and any of those things. There wasn't as much of that, so he used what was plentiful at the time. Apples. And really all through the colonial era, Applejack, or a whiskey or a brandy made from apples was essentially the most commonly used spirit. Over time, it's kind of lost its luster as whiskeys have taken their place, but Applejack is a really good, flavorful rendition of that. And so if you ever get a shot to, if you're looking for a good taste, I think Applejack, being the oldest American distillery, it's, by the way, still comes out of New Jersey. When you give it a pour, it's an 80 proof, so you know it's technically, you'll probably find it in the cordial section, but it's got a little bit of kick to it as an 80 proof. I like this on the rocks. When you smell it, immediately you get obviously apples because it is distilled from apples. But to me, it's almost like a beautiful apple cider. And when you take a sip, you get the sip of apple cider immediately, but then you get hit with the barrels that it is aged in. You get some age to it. So this is actually a brandy, but this is a brandy that drinks much more like a whiskey, right? So, and by the way, this works excellent. This is a great cooking cordial. This actually goes really well if you make apple pies. Cook your apples in this and you get a heck of an apple pie. My mother-in-law's will make your head spin. But this is a really, really good one. I tell you all, go if you're looking for a good festive fall drink. This is a good festive fall drink to get the apple juices flowing and something to get you started. So let's talk about Apple. Right. Speaking of Apple, I think it's good to talk a little bit about Apple, and let's go what we through the analysis of Apple kind of from the story, because Apple was in the news a lot this week. And specifically, you know, we think about Apple. Apple's come a long way since its first iteration. The first iteration of Apple in the mid 70s, this famously it was in Steve Jobs' garage, and Apple came out with, in my lifetime, the Apple IIe will always be my computer, my first ever real computer experience, because I played Oregon Trail. Come on, tell me you don't remember Oregon Trail. Oregon Trail was amazing. By the way, I'm sure that on the Oregon Trail, they had Applejack. But the Apple famously was a computer company until all of a sudden and then Apple went downhill, and then Steve Jobs came back, and the history is deep. But, Apple revolutionized the world when they came out with the iPod, right? The iPod was 1,000 songs in your pocket. Right, it was the 1,000 songs in your pocket, and the way that they marketed the iPod was revolutionary, right? And it started with the iPod, but now when you think about Apple, you think about the iWatch and Apple TV, and they just announced the new iPhone 11. They've still got iPads. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you guys know this, but they actually still make computers. Apple does still make computers. Lots of people are deeply into they're very Mac savvy and very Mac heavy. Well, Apple recently came out with news, especially with this most recent Apple announcement. And as it first came out, and it came out, I think it was on September the 10th, I think, when Apple had their announcement. Wall Street cheered at Apple's announcements. They were riveted. Now, what did they have to say? Well, the iPhone got some new upgrades, and the new upgrades in the next iPhone. There's the iPhone and the iPhone Pro. It's going to be the camera, right? The camera is the thing that people are raving about, but it does also have a chip upgrade as well, and a few other things. But there were some things that were missing from that iPhone, and some of the things that were missing, like you can't charge your AirPods on the back of your iPhone, which is not the case in some of those Android devices. The Android devices might be a step ahead in front of the Apple, and Apple is kind of playing catch up for the first time in a really long time. So Apple came out with all of these new upgrades. They talked about some of the new functions to the iWatch as well, or to the Apple Watch, excuse me. They got some new functions to the Apple Watch and an introductory iPad. Lots of different things that came out, and then a part of the big one was the streaming Apple TV service. Now, one of the things that Apple noticed was that they were lowering some of their prices, and Apple lowered some of their prices. And Apple TV Plus, the streaming service, actually came in significantly lower than expected on a monthly scale. So the street welcomed this news. And then 2 days later, actually, Apple got a downgrade. Goldman Sachs cut the outlook by Apple by 26%. And they actually dropped their rating from, they're still at a neutral rating, but they dropped their price target from 187 down to 165. And this is the biggest bank that's really had any sort of a drop on Apple. So when you think about Apple, there might be a few chinks in the armor, according to some of the analysts. Okay. Now it's funny that we see the analysts will say that 1 minute, and the next minute they talk about how Apple was being cheered. Right. Same news, same website, just 2 days later. Right. One is that the analysts are cheering it, and the next one is that Goldman Sachs smashes it. But there are people that still believe that the iPhone is overpriced and behind the times. And so what kind of an effect is that having on the Apple stock? Because you got to remember, going back to our FANG stocks, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, those ones there, people were very, very bullish on Apple and have been for a very long time. So now what's the next stage in Apple, right? Is Apple still a leader? And remember, Apple's not a dividend play, right? People buy Apple, but it pays a 1.4% dividend. People buy Apple as a growth stock. So does it still look like a growth stock? Well, to do that, we've got to go to the technicals. And let's go first to this weekly chart. So taking a look at this weekly chart, you can see that Apple's trading around $220 a share in this case. And that high upper wick on the weekly chart, as it comes into the supply area of about 233. So that supply area of about 233 would be the area where price has come back from in the past. Now that's the all-time high. So Apple is coming close to the all-time high, but the thing I want you to take note of is notice that every time Apple has pulled back since the all-time high, we've been unable to put in a new swing low, right? So the original fall from the all-time high, we rallied back up around April to about 215 a share, and then dropped back to about 170, and then rallied back up again, and then dropped back down. And so we've been unable to put in a new swing low. Now, being unable to put in a new swing low is inherently a bullish signal. If I add the moving averages to the chart, what you can see is that we are kind of riding along the 20-week moving average and sitting very nicely above the 50-week moving average, right? So the institutional averages are actually still pretty bullish in Apple overall. Now, on the daily chart, what do I see? Well, on the daily chart, you can see that we have the 200-day moving average is running right down the center. Now, as the 200-day moving average is running right down the center, it's basically been kind of flat, right? Not a lot of movement to our 200-day moving average, and that's because price is still in that same 220 range, right? Still below that high. The thing that I find interesting is notice the number of gaps we've seen in Apple in the last few weeks. More gaps recently than we normally see in Apple. And a gap tells me that there is possibly an increase in volatility. So what's my outlook on Apple overall? Well, I think right now, looking at Apple from the perspective of a fairly bullish security with an opportunity to get in on a decent pullback.
I think that it's going to probably perform as well as the market. I don't think it's going to be the fastest moving stock in the market any longer, and I think we're going to see more opportunities. So what I might tell people is, based on your own risk tolerance, you might want to lower your overall exposure to Apple, the amount that you have in there, relative to some of the other positions that might be a little bit more bullish and might give you a better opportunity. One way that you can take advantage of this is to take a look at how do I use options in order to better understand this. If you want to learn more about options, go to tradersarmy.com. We talk a lot about options at tradersarmy.com. Maybe help you understand some of the basics and the foundations about what to use. But options actually give you a lot more flexibility in this, simply because you have huge open interest in all of those options contracts. And it allows me maybe to sell puts to acquire the stock at a slightly lower price. But I'm still overall fairly bullish in Apple, and I think have a reason to continue to be. So if you've got any questions, please, I would love to hear your comments below. Tell me what you think about Apple. What do you think it's going to do? What is your opinion about Apple over the next 3-6 months? And if you've got a stock you'd like us to analyze, put it in the comment section down below. If you've got a spirit you'd like us to analyze, put that in the comment section down below. Until next week, everybody, I hope you have an absolutely amazing week. Cheers.